Today, we need to do a leak down test on the engine. I've read a bunch of articles and watched some videos on how and why to do a leak down test. I wanted to share what I've learnt with you, as the test makes much more sense when you know what's going on. This car has 6 cylinders. They're all exactly the same, and so we're just going to focus on one cylinder. You may have heard about car engines being 4-stroke engines. Well, here's why. When the piston moves up or down in the cylinder, it's called a stroke. The first stroke is induction, where the intake valve opens and lets the air-fuel mixture into the cylinder. The air is sucked in by the piston going down in the cylinder. The second stroke is where the intake valve closes, sealing the cylinder, and the piston comes back up for the compression stroke. At the top of the piston's travel, known as top dead center, the spark plug lights the air-fuel mixture and we get what's known as the combustion or power stroke, which pushes the piston back down into the cylinder. Finally, the exhaust valve opens and lets the piston come up for a fourth and final stroke to push the exhaust gases out. Then the cycle repeats over and over. This whole thing happens an average of 30 times every second. If the cylinder was a sealed container, there would be no need to test for leaks. End of story. In reality, there are 4 places in the cylinder where leaking can occur. The first one is the opening for the intake valve that lets the air-fuel mixture into the cylinder. Could be dirty, might be bent perhaps from hitting the piston, which is something that we're concerned about. The second one is the opening for the exhaust valve for the same reasons. Also, if the cam timing is off, which is something we're concerned about, these valves won't be in the right place at the right time, which is how they can end up hitting the piston. The third place that they can leak from is from the piston rings. When an engine is new, the piston rings seal really well. As the engine ages, the piston rings will let more and more combustion gases leak past the piston and into the crankcase. That's one of the main reasons why oil gets dirty. It's from this blow-by, from the combustion gases blowing by the piston rings over time. Apparently some blow-by is normal. They all do it a little bit. And the fourth possibility is a crack in the cylinder wall or a bad cylinder head gasket that's allowing some of the combustion gases into the cooling system and antifreeze. That's why if you have milky oil, that's a sign of having water in your oil, and it could be from one of these problems, a crack in the cylinder head, or most likely just an old cylinder head gasket. To do a compression test, you put a pressure gauge into the spark plug hole and run the starter motor a few times. The gauge will register the highest pressure it felt from the piston's compression stroke. If the cylinder does have a leak from any of those 4 places, you'll have less compression and the gauge will read a lower number. But the compression test doesn't tell you where the leak is coming from. A leak down test is similar but different, and this is why I'm doing it. One, I don't want to run the starter motor because we know that the engine's somehow compromised, but also this will tell us more information than the compression test would anyway. So step 1 is we need to get the piston to top dead center so that the valves are all closed and it's ready for the spark plug to light the fuel. Next, we use a hose attached to the leak down tester gauge to fill the cylinder with compressed air. The leak down tester will then measure how much of that air is leaking out and register on the gauge as a percentage. The reason the leak down test is better is because you'll be able to hear, hopefully, the air leaking from one of the places that's causing the lack of compression. For example, if the intake valve is not sealing properly, it may be possible to hear air leaking from the throttle body. If the exhaust valve is not sealing properly, you may be able to hear air leaking from the exhaust. And if the pistons are not sealing, you may be able to hear air leaking from the dipstick that's coming past the rings. And finally, if you have air leaking into the cooling system, you may see bubbles forming in your coolant expansion tank. Thank you for sticking with me through that theory. And so now welcome to the reality. The main difference between the compression test and that leak down test is compressed air. I don't have an air compressor in the tiny garage. There's not really space for that. But I did get from Harbor Freight, of course, this air bubble or portable air tank. I also got a little kit with that that came with this yellow hose, which is a lot nicer than what it came with. It came with just one of those regular hoses you might use to inflate a tire. And so this hose, you're able to put a quick disconnect on the end. That came in the kit. And even though this is not related to this project, it does mean that I'll be able to have a little bit of air inflation in the garage, and also a tool to just blow off dust and stuff like that, which would be handy no matter what. So that guy has to get inflated. Now you can bring it to the gas station, which I did bring it to the gas station earlier today, and I'll tell you a little story about that in a minute. But I had this thing, which is a portable, obviously jumper for batteries, but on the back it does have an air inflation tube, and I tried it on here, and actually I was able to get more pressure in this, around 50 psi, by using this battery pack than I was by actually using the hose at the gas station, for whatever reason. But the problem I had with this air tank is that since playing with it a little bit, obviously it's very cheap, the Schrader valve, learning names today, which is that regular tire valve, you have them on regular bicycles and car tires, that is leaking. It's poking out a little bit, and I need to try to see if I can fix that. Now to do that, I bought the there's a tool for that, a little valve tool, 4-way valve tool, to see if maybe I can just tighten it. And if that doesn't work, I bought new valves to see if that might fix it. Because other than that, it does seem to kind of work. In the few minutes that I had some air, I tried to see if it would work, and it seemed like it might work. So that's going to be something we're going to do in a minute here. But we will continue with the plan, which is doing this leak down test. So you take the air from this quick disconnect, assuming that the air bubble is working right. And then here is the leak down testing kit. This I bought again, not from Harbor Freight. They were sold out, believe it or not. But this is from Amazon, very, very cheap. Both of these things were $30 each. You can easily pay, from what I've seen, up to $200 for one of these leak down testing kits. So those are the gauges, and the compressed air connects on to this side here. It'll be sort of quick, I'll get used to it, I guess. And then this is the hose that has a spark plug thread on the end, and then that goes into the spark plug hole and allows you to connect this then to the quick disconnect on the other side of this gauge, which I won't even try to do right now. And that lets you put the air into the gauges, and then the gauges can then put the air into the cylinder to do the test. Now this regular threaded hose works just fine in the Porsche. This is a 14mm spark plug adapter, and that's common, and so it comes with these other little adapters in this box, and you don't need them. Thankfully, the Porsche is boring and normal in that regard. So that's it for the test. We'll get more details on this as we play with it more. But the problem with the air bubble, let's get back to that. Earlier today, I took this to the gas station. I thought it'd be way better than my mobile device here to fill it. And then I put it back in the truck afterwards, was driving home, and it was leaking. I tried to see if it was this area where I'd connected this recently. This is not what came with it, and I kind of expected that that was where it was leaking, but it wasn't. It was really obviously leaking from the Schrader valve itself, that little fella right there. Now, this 4-way tool, I don't know what the other tools do, but I'm pretty sure that's the one that I need. And there is not much going on with that tool. It's just a very simple screwdriver thing. And I'm going to unscrew that and take it out. Actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to tighten it up first, because maybe we get lucky and that's what all it needs. You know what? Yeah. Ooh, ha ha ha. Maybe that is all that needs to happen. I'm not supposed to over tighten. I've heard that that's a thing. Oh my gosh. Now, if it's that easy, let's see if that works. Well, that does seem to have fixed it. I'm using this technique I've seen Ian Tyrrell do on YouTube. He uses a tube to listen to carburetors on cars. And so using this, it's very good for listening for air leaks. And so the Schrader valve, nothing. Yes. It's late at night, so there's no noise outside. And then the attachment that I had put on also seems good. And the PSI, in that one run, I was able to get it up to 40 PSI. I'm not sure if you can see that on there. The test, according to the instructions, it says you want to have at least 40 PSI, between 40 and 100 PSI. And with this portable inflator, it can crikey. Okay, I'd left it on, and that actually tells you what it's all about. It gets hot. The pump gets hot, and so I don't know if it's on a timer or if it's on a there's some sort of thermal switch in there, but it will turn itself off after a certain amount of time, and then it will come back on again, and it will continue filling. And so I can get this. The other day when I was trying this, I could get it to 50 psi more or less, but now that this Schrader valve is fixed, hopefully we can get it a bit further than 50 psi. And I'm going to try it at the gas station again tomorrow and see if we can get it even further, because it wouldn't fill properly today, and I know that now is because of this Schrader valve. Anyway, I've said Schrader valve enough, and so hopefully I'll never have to say it again. Schrader valve. A quick conversation about these sockets that I'm using to turn the crankshaft. So it's a 24mm, that's fine. But what I found was here is not a deep socket, 24mm, and this is ever so slightly not deeper. You can do it, but by the time you put it on there, your knuckles are so close to the other pulleys, it's going to hurt. And then if I put on this 24mm deep socket, that is too long, and so you end up that the back of this wrench is touching by the bumper here, and that's no good. So what I found is just this, it's probably a really good way of doing this that I just don't know. But then I put this adapter on there, which is a 3/8 to 1/2 inch, and then I got a 1/2 inch version of this instead of a 3/8 inch. Hold on. Okay, so then you put that on there, and then that's the perfect distance. I also used this piece of wire to hold the oil filler tube out of the way. It kept sagging down and getting in the way when I was trying to turn the crankshaft. And then for the throttle body, I put this rubber handle screwdriver in there to make it easier to hear any air coming out if there was any. And for the oil filler tube as well, I just pulled the dipstick out a little bit so you could hear from there also. In an attempt to do this job properly, I bought this beautifully machined tool to figure out top dead center. It is a top dead center finding tool. You screw this part here, which is a 14mm diameter screw that you would expect on the spark plug hole on this car. And so you put that into the spark plug hole and screw that in. And then as the piston comes up to top dead center, it pushes this beautifully machined spring-loaded plunger up, and it has these lovely graduations on the end to tell you where top dead center would be. Wherever the last place that it gets to, that's the top. The problem is that the cylinder heads on this car, and I'm sure other cars, are so deep with where the spark plug goes and then the coil pack goes on top that you can't even see the tool or any of the graduations once it's in there. So that's not going to work. Anyway, you've heard of the chopstick method. This is the drumstick method. I don't like this drumstick, and so if it gets used to fix this car, then fantastic. The drumstick is a bit bigger, I think you'd agree, and a little bit chubbier than your average chopstick, and that makes it fit this diameter really quite well, and so it doesn't sag or anything. And then I put these graduations on there, which don't really mean anything. They're almost millimeters probably, but really we just need to know where the end is in order to figure out where top dead center is. And then I'm going to use this with the help of that license plate to know where top dead center is. Here we go. So here's the license plate. I just screwed it onto the side of the muffler mount to act as a pointer for the graduations I put on the side of the drumstick. It also kind of holds it there well. Here I am putting the drumstick in cylinder 1 to find top dead center, turning the crankshaft there, And then with my hand you can feel as the drumstick comes up and it sort of hangs, it kind of stops moving a little bit just as it comes to top dead center there. It'll stay like that for a second, and then once I was confident I knew where that was, I marked it on the stick. Pretty much the same for all the cylinders, which is good. And then for cylinder 1 you do get this notch that will tell you also that you're on top dead center, which is very handy. So I think I found top dead center. As we know from the diagram earlier, it could be one of two places. Either we're at the place where we should be, top dead center, right as the explosion goes off and both valves are shut. It's possible that we're on the next time the piston comes up where the exhaust valve is open and the piston's actually just pushing the exhaust out of the exhaust valve. And so one way or the other, we're going to connect up the air and see what happens. If it leaks completely out of the exhaust, we may have got it wrong. Let's do it. But this gauge is saying that there's 60 psi coming in, and then this gauge, we want to set it to 0 so that it could kind of be anywhere really, but we want to just at least put it on something so we know where 0 is, that we can compare it to other things. And by doing this, by turning this gauge, let's turn it some direction. All right, it's lined up with 0. So then when we connect this other quick disconnect to the hose that we put into the spark plug, this guy, it's creeping up. Don't do that. This will go down, hopefully not very much, because that means that there's some sort of health situation. And at the same time, if we hear any loss of air, we're going to put the hose up to my ear and up to the various places we discussed and see if we can figure out where the air is leaking from. Okay, so here I'm getting a high setting for leaking. And I can feel it. That's my hand on the exhaust. You can hear it coming out of the exhaust. Okay, let's disconnect that. Wasting precious air. Still got 30 psi left according to this. So one thing that seems to be a better idea is when you first connect it. So I think if I have this completely screwed out, so that this goes down to 0, and then bring it up by screwing it in to 0. If you start the other way, which sometimes can happen if this is in the wrong position, it'll like put it all the way past the 100% really, all the way around. If you set it back to set from there, it doesn't seem to work. I don't know why, but don't do that. So did I go the wrong way here? Yeah, I did. So you want to go this way up to set. There we go. And then whatever you're doing is much more accurate. Anyway, so flowing out of the exhaust right there, hopefully I got it wrong, and that if we turn the engine now again and bring this back to top dead center, that won't happen. Oh my gosh, let's hope. We need to talk for a second about firing order. We just put the car in top dead center for cylinder 1, and that's where you start. And so we got some results from that, whatever they mean. We need to move on. And so if you remember from before, when we drew out the cylinders, here is the crankcase, the main part of the engine. And then we have 3 cylinders on one side. And this is the driver's side. And that is bank 1. And there's 1, 2, and 3 cylinders there. And then on the other side, the passenger side, we have, crazy cylinder, we have bank 2. And those are cylinders 4, 5, and 6. And so they don't all go off together, though that seems like maybe that would be a great idea. They go off in order across the engine, kind of just spread out the stress of those explosions going off. And so it starts off here on 1, which we just set that up for top dead center. And so the next one that will come to top dead center is cylinder 6. And then after that, it's going to go to cylinder 2 across to the other side of the engine.
So 1, 6, 2, and then it goes across to the other side of the engine again, 4, and then it goes across back to the other side of the engine, 3, so we're done with that side of the engine, and then the only one that's left is 5. Bonk. And so the firing order is 1, 6, 2, 4, 3, 5. And so when we're trying to test for top dead center and all that kind of good stuff, we need to go in this order. So the next one we're going to try is at cylinder 6, and that should come up to top dead center next.
Once I was all set up, doing the leak down test on each of the 6 cylinders took about 30 minutes. Start off by getting the cylinder to top dead center, then you want to put the hose into the spark plug hole, and then you set your gauges to get that needle to go into the set zone. Next, you want to connect those gauges up to the hose coming out from the spark plug hole. That's when the air will start to flow, and you can check the reading on the gauge. And then also go around with the hose to your ear and listen at those different areas, and it does make it very obvious if there's anything leaking. And if the cylinder is in good condition, it seems like really there's not much. You're going to hear a little bit at the oil filler tube, that seems to be normal. But if there is a leak from the exhaust, it's pretty obvious. It sounds like this. And then I deliberately put it on the intake valve being open just to see what that was like, and the sound coming from the throttle body was like this. It seems that if the cylinder is in good shape, you don't really hear much when you connect the air, and the oil filler tube does seem to have a little bit of air flowing, but on this car the engine is cold. You are supposed to have the engine warm for this test, which would make the gaps between the engine parts smaller. And then also you are supposed to have oil in the car, and this car doesn't really have much of any oil in the cylinders right now. And so the fact that there's a little bit of air coming through the oil filler tube is not a surprise. According to the instructions that come with the leak down test, anything that's under 20% leakage can be considered normal.
So let's take a look at the results. Here's the engine looking at it from above with the cylinders laid out as we spoke about before. Cylinder 1, 48% leakage from that exhaust valve. I tested it more than once. That was the best that it did in any of the tests. Next was cylinder 6, which got a respectable 8%. Next up, cylinder 2, 12%. Then we went across to cylinder 4 with another good 8%. Then across again to cylinder 3 with 14%, and then finally cylinder 5 with 11%. Now one thing you'll notice there is the numbers on the bank 2, cylinders 4, 5 and 6 are much better. And those cylinders, if you remember from the boroscope, all kind of looked nice and clean. Whereas the cylinders on bank 1 and cylinders 2 and 3 were quite dirty, and then cylinder 1 in particular was that nightmare looking cylinder that was covered in all of those crusty charcoal deposits, I think is what we'll call them. So that does make me suspect that the results we got in the leak down test do seem to show something that's been going on in the engine. While I was doing the leak down test, I noticed that these little plastic covers called cam bore plugs were off in a couple of places. These plugs cover up the end of the cam itself, and I put a video camera up onto it. I apologize about the terrible quality. It's difficult to get anything in there. But when I turned the engine, it did actually turn this little key looking thing. You are supposed to lock them in top dead center is what it says before you take the engine apart or anything. And so I need to get one of these special tools to do that. And you can see it in the picture here. It locks into the groove that's in that disc. I did notice though that when cylinder 1 was in top dead center, which really does seem like it was in top dead center, and the pulley was lined up with the notch and all that good stuff, that even then this disc would not line up properly. And I did a bit of rough math, and if you look at those lines, approximately it seems about 12 degrees off. Interestingly, of course, this happens to be on the side of the engine where the pistons are kind of black from incomplete combustion. And of course, we have that leak on cylinder 1 through the exhaust, which is right next to where this cam bore plug is located. On the other side of the engine, on the back, there are 2 more bore plugs. One of those was missing, and when cylinder 4, which is the first cylinder of bank 2, is in top dead center, that key does line up just right, as you might expect. And so perhaps the cam timing is off on bank 1, and that's something that we can watch for when we take the engine apart. Wow. I learned a lot this week. I hope you guys did too. I had heard of a leak down test before, but now I do feel like I understand much more about what's going on. It also helped me understand much more about what's going on with this car and this engine and engines in general. And that's going to come in handy when we take the engine out and we have to try to start finding those problem areas. The other thing we learned as well today was that those really cheap tools seem to work just fine. If any of you out there that do this every day could tell us what it is that those better tools do that these cheaper tools don't, I would love to know. But it seemed to work just fine for our needs today. That's all we have time for. I really appreciate you guys watching. Thank you very much. Till next time.